Hi guys, I think the worst type of Brexiteer meltdowns are over the idea that the EU owes Britain something following what was frankly a toxic separation when Theresa May and later Boris Johnson were in number 10 and steering the withdrawal. Brexit has been extremely damaging to many sectors of the UK, so it only makes sense to try and improve the situation for British businesses and the wider economy. However, outlets like GB News have to ramp up the fearmongering, which is directed at an increasingly narrow section of society. Apologies in advance for any screaming at the screen here.
Let's be honest, democracy is about to be sold out by a man with a slick haircut and a donated suit. This is not a reset, this is realignment. You know, it's something that many of us argued that Keir Starmer was going to push for this very heavily as soon as he got into office. And whilst many of us expected a little bit of smaller, more technical changes, there is a lot on the table all at once. And the question we really have to ask is, why are we even at this table in the first place? So you've got university students, fisheries, animal health and illegal immigration. Now, these issues may seem to be to do with trade, but I actually think there's something more at play here. I think this is political. If we actually look where a lot of this has come from, it's not come from...
Sorry, everything is political. We're talking about politics here. We're talking about politicians. The relationship between the UK and the EU, yes, part of it is trade, but a significant part is political. So this is not news.
From the Commission, it's come from the Council of Europe, it's come from European leaders. And what we're really seeing is the European Union leaders panicking about not what's happening in Europe, it's about what's happening over the other side of the Atlantic, and that's Donald Trump. The European Union's actual economic situation isn't great. And with the impending probably trade wars and tariffs coming from the United States, you know, a lot of this stuff is starting to kind of scare a lot of European leaders. And yeah, this is kind of where we are now, that they want to kind of bring the UK back to heel. And this is not, we won't be...
Sorry, bring the UK back to heel. What does that mean? Bring the UK back to heel. So the first part of what he said is true. Donald Trump is talking about a trade war, he's talking about tariffs, and this is frankly scary in Europe because we do a lot of trade with the US. And the US does a lot of trade with the European Union. And there are countries like Ireland which are deeply dependent on large industries from the US. So this is concerning, definitely, and no one's denying that. But what's this got to do with the UK? Well, the UK is outside, of course. And if the UK wants to have a good relationship with the United States, there's talk of having a trade deal. I think that would be a bad idea. But when it comes to most of the trade that the UK has, it's with the European Union. So it's going to eventually side with the European Union. It has to, for economic reasons. Now, political reasons are more complex.
Be a negotiation because it's Keir Starmer. He's just got to roll over and sign, have his belly tickled and say, where do I sign?
I find this so funny from Brexiteers. You know, they rolled over when it came to trade deals with Japan. They rolled over when it came to trade deals with New Zealand and Australia. You know, look at British farming. Ask them, are they better off because of these trade deals? So it's funny that, you know, a Brexiteer will talk about rolling over and signing anything. I've been criticising Brexiteer governments since the beginning, where they would not stand up for British interests. See, there's a different dynamic here. Australia is a smaller economy. New Zealand is an extremely smaller economy in respect to the UK. The UK was in a stronger position in a sense, but then at the end of the day, the Brexiteers didn't care about signing a good trade deal. They just wanted a piece of paper that they could hold up in the House of Commons and say, see, we have a Brexit benefit.
You know, this is a real betrayal, in my opinion.
And that's what a lot of people will be frightened of, is that when we left...
A lot of people. Sorry. A lot of people. Who are these people? Because if you look at polling, support for Brexit is constantly declining, while support for rejoining the European Union is increasing. Now, that does not mean that if there was a referendum tomorrow that a majority would support rejoining. But the general public are not happy with the consequences of Brexit. They're not happy with news stories about how food prices are going up, and then when they do a bit of digging, they discover, well, a lot of it is down to Brexit. Checks at the ports, more bureaucracy, more cost for small businesses, farmers who are struggling to find the workers they need to pick fruit and vegetables. This story, you know, while a lot of this was at the very beginning of Brexit, it's still having an impact.
In Brexit, when we left Europe, they were decidedly hostile to us and gave us...
No. The European Union was not hostile to the UK. What evidence do you have to back up that claim? They said There are a number of things that need to be sorted out before you leave. Because Boris Johnson and Lord Frost wanted to have a trade deal before the withdrawal agreement was signed. And the European Union said, no, we need to sort out the situation in Northern Ireland. We need to make sure that Northern Ireland is as safe as possible, that the Good Friday Agreement is protected, because we don't trust Brexiteers. And they were right, because Boris Johnson and the Brexiteers didn't understand the Good Friday Agreement. They didn't care about the Good Friday Agreement. So the European Union and Ireland were saying, please, let's sort out the situation in Northern Ireland first, and then have it, something written into law, and then we can deal with trade. But the Brexiteers didn't want to go down that road. And then what did they do? They started talking about, well, we're going to rip up the withdrawal agreement. We're going to tear up the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Us all the impression that, that our relationship with them would be one of punishment.
Yeah.
They would always punish them. So if we're going to try and row back on any parts, little bits and pieces, they're going to exact a price that we won't want to pay.
Of course they will. Let's be real. Even in this document, they were saying that, Keir Starmer's Turkey is stuffed. There's the language is already hostile. They're like,
it's not Keir Starmer's Turkey that's stuffed. It's the UK's. Because, as we keep pointing out, if you want to go toe-to-toe with the European Union, you better be prepared. You're going to have to offer things. Why is this so difficult for Brexiteers to understand? They keep talking about how we need to do a trade deal with the US and Donald Trump will give us a good trade deal because he likes the UK. No! He will look after US interests first. Won't be him, but generally the US will look after US interests first. Why would anyone honestly think that the US would look after UK interests first in a trade deal? Maybe it's because Brexiteers were looking out for Australian interests first, or New Zealander interests first when it came to those trade deals. But no, generally reasonable politicians, people who have some sort of reputation to protect, or they have to represent their country on the world stage in a positive way, will look after their country's interests first. But for some reason, Brexiteers think that the US would help Britain out, and then it's a case of, well, Keir Starmer needs to stand up to the EU. The UK is in a weaker position. So of course the EU is going to extract more concessions. It's a bigger economy, it has a bigger market, but also it's in a stronger position.
You need us, and this kind of, there's no partnership here, and there never has been. So many people in the...
No, there's not a partnership at the moment. Well, politically, you can have a partnership, but economically, it's more complicated than that. These people seem to think that the UK and the EU are on an equal footing. They're not.
The United Kingdom have kind of downplayed the hostility of the European Union in any negotiation that we've engaged.
Give us an example. Give us an example of the hostility from the EU. Because the EU are saying, as I said before, we need to make sure that Northern Ireland is protected, is in a stable situation before we start talking about trade deals. Because we don't trust you. Who would trust Boris Johnson? Who in their right mind would trust Boris Johnson? Apart from the DUP, but the DUP are not in their right mind. Honestly, is there anyone, please, anyone in the comment section, do you trust Boris Johnson? Because why would any Brexiteer expect the EU to trust Boris Johnson? Especially when the UK later said, well, we're willing to break international law in a limited and specific way.
Engaged with them, and yet the EU, in their right, have pushed forward to put forward their own agenda, and yet the UK has always taken a back step. It's about time that we had a Prime Minister at some point who decided maybe it's time that we put the British interests first.
But he is putting British interests first by trying to reduce the trade barriers. He's trying to introduce things for young people, like, it's not he's introducing it, but he's trying to work with the EU to introduce this youth mobility scheme. Erasmus, these things are putting British interests first. Brexiteers are not interested in putting British interests first. They only care about themselves. Honestly, in what way was Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson or Jacob Rees-Mogg or any of these individuals putting British interests first? One of the worst was the Erasmus scheme. The EU said, we can offer it to you during the negotiations. We're not going to extract anything. Here is an offer on the table, an Erasmus scheme. And the British government said, no, we don't want that. Why? Probably because it contains the word Europe.
And this is, yet again, it just shows that even if we vote for something in this country, there's no guarantee that it'll stick. And this is a real problem of trust in our politics.
What I find very odd, we were talking to Mark Oaten, former chairman of the Liberal Democrats earlier on. Liberal Democrats were always anti-Brexit, always campaigned to get it changed, all the rest of it. Fair due to them. That's their view. Even he was saying, look, we either need to be in the EU or out of the EU. We're not...
Oh, my goodness. Okay. The UK has a relationship with Europe. There's no North Korea when it comes to the UK situation. I know some Brexiteers would like the UK to be the North Korea of Europe, but there are a lot of significant and existing trade connections. So this idea that the UK could cut itself off from the rest of Europe was nonsense.
This sort of half measure, which this seems to be.
Yeah, we've always been known as the awkward partner. Even when we were part of the European Union, we had certain special privileges and certain deals that other countries never had. And, you know, we're either in it or we're out of it. And I've always believed that. And I've always respected Remainers, all people, rejoiners who said, look, I want to rejoin the European Union. If you come out and say that, the British public will probably have a lot more respect for you than you saying one thing and then weaseling out of it in another way and trying to say, oh, it's just a technical skirting, or it's just a little detail here, a little change there. That infuriates people even more because it just shows that you're not being upfront and you're not being honest. And that is Keir Starmer through and through.
Oh my goodness. Okay. We can't wait in Europe or in the UK for a situation where, okay, now we have a referendum for the UK to rejoin the European Union, and we don't do anything between now and then. In order to get to the stage where there's a real possibility for the UK to rejoin the European Union, steps have to be taken. Alignment with EU standards, better cooperation, be it on security, on dealing with immigration. There are a number of things that have to take place before the UK is in a position, both politically and economically, to rejoin the European Union. It's not a case of, okay, well, what we do is we sit on our hands for the next 10 years, and then what we'll do is we'll have a referendum. That's not going to work. Maybe this is what this guy is suggesting. It's nonsense. The only silver lining here is that these people are talking to, these commentators are talking to, this section of society is getting smaller and smaller. The number of people, and you can see it online, you can probably see it in your life, the number of people who support the idea of Brexit is diminishing. It's getting smaller. And the number of people who realize this was a massive mistake is increasing. So in the meanwhile, before there is a referendum, it makes sense to try and improve the situation for British businesses, to try and grow the economy, to try and have a better relationship with the EU. And that has to be commended, even if you support Brexit. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.